Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Afghanistan, and not just Afghanistan. I've been thinking about Afghanistan and Lebanon. And that's because Lebanon is set to become the next Afghanistan. The country is hurting. The people are suffering. For the past month, Lebanon has been hit with an almost complete electricity blackout. They have no oil, no gas. They have no diesel, and it has seen some serious diesel issues because diesel is the fuel which the electric grid runs on. Garbage is backing up and piling so high that it looks like dump sites. The country is imploding, and its only savior is Hezbollah. Yes, Hezbollah, kindred soul and kissing cousin of the Taliban. Hezbollah is offering to come to the rescue of Lebanon, but that offer comes with a price. What differentiates Lebanon from Afghanistan is that there are no Western armies and almost no Westerners living in Lebanon to be overrun or overtaken or taken captive. They've left. Westerners have been there, whether contractors, military personnel, or diplomats, would by now either have been targets of brutal murder or hostages. That's not conjecture, it's proven history. During the course of the civil war in Lebanon, that lasted from 82 to 92, dozens of Westerners were held captive, either for ransom or as publicity tools, and many were simply murdered. The poster boy of Westerners held captive by the Lebanese during that war was the towering figure Terry Waite. Towering not only because of his 6'7" height, towering because Terry Waite was the envoy of the Anglican Church, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Because Terry Waite naively went out to meet and reason with the very people who captured him and who held him hostage for 4 years. Luckily, he survived. So many others did not. Lebanon is divided. It's a divided country in general. It's constitutionally divided. That's the government is set up to do that, to divide. Must be composed of 3 of the largest groups living there. They are Sunnis, Shiites, and Christians. To put it mildly, they do not get along. Leader after leader has failed to unite them, resulting in today's failed and flailing country. And now the door is wide open, and Hezbollah, like knights in shining armor, is ready to ride in and assume the role of savior. But there is nothing knightly about Hezbollah. Hezbollah does not save. Hezbollah destroys. Hezbollah is the Iranian-backed Shiite terror organization that has been fighting in Syria. Hezbollah is well-trained, they're well-equipped, and they are highly motivated. They have been the most effective of all fighting forces in Syria, fighting for Assad. It is Hezbollah that has been propping up the Syrian President Bashar Assad. I monitor Hezbollah. I monitor it very closely. I watch what they do carefully because Hezbollah is a real and immediate threat to the West, especially to Israel. Hassan Nasrallah is the head of Hezbollah. To commemorate the Shiite holiday of Ashura, Nasrallah gave a nationally televised address. Ashura means 10th in Arabic, like Asara in Hebrew. The holiday of Ashura is celebrated on the 10th day of the first month, hence the name. Ashura is a day of mourning for Shiite Islam. It emphasizes a stark enmity between Shiites and Sunnis. It commemorates the Battle of Karbala in 680 CE, when Sunni Muslims brutally murdered the Shiite leader Hussein, the grandson of Muhammad, his followers, and all of their families. Nasrallah took the opportunity on TV to issue a warning to the United States and Israel. A Lebanese oil tanker was about to set sail from Iran, filled with oil to save Lebanon. And the warning was, keep out of its way. Do not violate its space. Nasrallah said, and I'm quoting here, we do not want to get into a challenge with anyone. We don't want to get into a problem with anyone. We want to help our people. I say to the Americans and the Israelis that the boat that will sail within hours from Iran is Lebanese territory, unquote. He continues now, God willing, the ship and others will arrive safely, unquote. One oil tanker will not save Lebanon, neither will 2 or 3. Nasrallah was grandstanding. He was positioning Hezbollah as the savior of Lebanon. And the reason this is so important to Hezbollah is that by saving Lebanon, Hezbollah hopes to resurrect their reputation that has been seriously hit over the past year. Average Lebanese non-Hezbollah supporters have been blaming Hezbollah for Israeli counterattacks into their country after Hezbollah shoots rockets and drones into Israel. The strikes add to the stress in a crisis-weary Lebanon. The Maronite Christian patriarch just announced that the Lebanese army must take control of Lebanon and rein in Hezbollah. The patriarch has called for a stop to bombing Israel. Many Lebanese argue that, at least, this is one part of their atrocities that they can control. But Hezbollah cannot be reasoned with. Under normal circumstances, an oil tanker from Iran going to Lebanon or to Syria would have been stopped by the United States. But these are not normal circumstances. The United States has made a promise to Lebanon to help their electricity crisis. The problem is that any country that helps Lebanon is also helping Iran, and in a very significant way, by allowing Iran to end around sanctions and allowing them to sell their oil. If Lebanon should fall, it will fall into the arms of Hezbollah, and another state will be under the total control of an Islamic terrorist organization, like the Taliban in Afghanistan. The West does not want this to happen. Only Iran and Hezbollah want that to happen. It's not in the best interest of the West, or for that matter, the rest of the Arab world also, for Lebanon to fall. Countries must move quickly to avoid what seems almost inevitable. The wolf in sheep's clothing, aka Hezbollah, is standing at the door. Coming up next, points of view. Both columns today come from the Jerusalem Post, and I have a bias towards the Post because I write a weekly column there. That aside, the Jerusalem Post is the best source in English for columns and editorials. The Jerusalem Post has interesting ideas. They're interested in ideas. They discuss all ideas, the ideas that we discuss. Israel, diaspora, anti-Semitism, the Middle East, Judaism, internal conflicts within Israel and within the Jewish community. And of course, they also celebrate great Jewish events. First up is an editorial from August 19th, 2021. Remember, an editorial appears without a name. It's the point of view of the editorial board. This editorial is entitled, Naftali Bennett Should Speak with Mahmoud Abbas, editorial. Subtitle, Palestinian Firefighters Helping to Fight the Jerusalem Wildfire was a symbolic act that brought some teeth to the far-off idea that we must share the land and protect it together. The headline says it all. There's no question about it. This is how the editorial begins. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett should speak with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. There have been important signs and gestures recently that point to a real opportunity to improve relations between the Palestinians and Israel. The acrimony of the past could be melted by important steps from this government, especially in light of Palestinians sending firefighting equipment and personnel to help Israel put out the fires near Jerusalem this week. The editorial gives several examples of the thawing of the relations. It continues, there is more. 2 Jordanian military helicopters came to Ramallah recently to take Abbas to Jordan to meet with King Abdullah II. This important meeting included the head of the PA's General Intelligence Service, Majed Faraj, head of General Authority's Civil Affairs, Hussein al-Sheikh, and Foreign Minister Riyad Malki. These are all signs of wheels moving. From Jordan to Egypt, there are indications of warming ties with Israel. More public events and official visits are planned, with Bennett expected to travel to Egypt in the coming weeks. The editorial now concludes by saying that now is the time. Seize the opportunity. In their words, unfortunately, Israel and the PA have very little engagement today beyond security coordination. While there may be no magic peace deal on the horizon, there's no reason that the two neighbors can't begin to work together on certain areas of common interest, as demonstrated by this week's joint firefighting efforts. The region needs stability. Before Bennett's trip to Washington, there is no better time than now for him to reach out to Abbas. That was an excellent editorial. Next up is a column by Dan Perry. It's somewhat critical, but it's important to read. It appeared also in the Jerusalem Post on August 22nd, 2021. It's titled, When It Comes to the Taliban, the U.S. Didn't Play to Win. Opinion. Subtitled, The Credibility of the Americans Has Been Soundly Trashed in Terms of Planning, Intelligence, and Diplomacy. Perry is a former Cairo-based Middle East editor and London-based Europe-African editor of the Associated Press, the AP. This is how he begins. President Joe Biden can insist all he wants that America embarked upon the Afghan misadventure to combat terror and not to nation build. It isn't exactly true. The Bush doctrine, in a nutshell, was to export democracy and Western values to hitherto benighted countries whose populace was surely yearning to be free. Many predicted it would fail, both in Afghanistan and Iraq. Interestingly, it failed more in Afghanistan, which is to say completely. This weekend, the whole thing fell apart as the puppet-like president, Ashraf Ghani, fled and the Taliban returned to power 2 decades after being kicked out, with the Americans effecting a panicky retreat reminiscent of the fall of Saigon. Afghanistan will once again be ruled by Islamic fanatics, and women can expect worse. Perry explains that these events should not have been a surprise to anyone, he writes. It's not entirely surprising. The British and the Russians also failed in their attempt to change this mountainous and isolated land. One of the challenges is that it suffers a yawning chasm between town and country, which is a little like its cousin in the West, but more extreme. The periphery is even more religious and even more tribal, and it accounts for a larger share of the population. Corruption is perhaps the glue that holds it all together. Perry now lambasts Trump and Israel. Trump for being responsible for the drawdown, which began under his watch. At least the plans for it began under his watch, a completely different set of plans. And Israel, because he believes it's wrong for Israel to mock Biden and critique him from afar and assume the Democrats are weak in the context of that critique. He says that there are 3 reasons why it's wrong, and here they are. He writes, Trump started it, that is, he had a plan in place with the Taliban. He also, number 2, he says, is that the United States has done Afghanistan all by itself for years. And 3, Israel is not involved, and they are not going to get involved. I do not agree with every column we examine here. Like this column, for example. In fact, I think Perry is very wrong in so many ways. Israel does have an important stake in what happens in Afghanistan, especially because of the ripple effect, of how others will see what happened and learn from that. Others, especially Iran. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to show you a few cartoons and memes today. First is a meme, it's just funny. It's funny as the Dickens, actually. A Taliban fighter is sitting at a laptop with his machine gun alongside him. He is clearly in an office. The printer's behind him, papers are on the desk, and the caption reads, "Adding bullet points to the presentation." That's hilarious. Next up is a headline about ISIS and the Taliban. The headline reads, Islamic State brands Taliban takeover of Afghanistan a US-backed conspiracy. Of course ISIS believes that. They really do believe that. Now, a sign from a truck yard. The sign reads, a comment on traffic and COVID. This is what it says. I missed the part of COVID when there was no traffic. I got to tell you, I missed that part too. If traffic is any indication of what's going on and the direction we're moving in, we are returning to normal. This next one is a play on Yoda and medieval art. It reads, British historian discovers 14th century manuscript containing images that look eerily similar to Yoda. Yoda truly is timeless. After his first appearance in Star Wars, he became a household icon. Next up are 2 slides. The top slide is of Egyptian slaves, maybe Jews, building the pyramids. One slave says, "This is murder." Another slave responds, "Yeah, but at least people thousands of years from now will appreciate the effort and skill it took to build these pyramids." The lower slide is a modern tourist looking at the pyramids. She says, "Aliens definitely built these." This is such a critical comment about how little history people know and about their lack of curiosity. Next is a cartoon about the Taliban. A Taliban leader is thinking. He thinks, perhaps we can begin a new era for Afghanistan, one of peace, equality, love, and reconciliation. Perhaps in an otherwise dark world of injustice and violence, we can be a shining city on a hill for all to see. Then he thinks again, and the caption reads, nah, that's what we have right now. Now we see the infinity sign. Atop the infinity sign is an ordinary-looking elderly couple holding a newspaper. The husband says, "Why do we never seem to go anywhere?" The newspaper he's reading has the same old headlines: mask mandates, booster shots, hospital crisis. Now we see the couple on the bottom end of the infinity sign wearing t-shirts that read "No masks, no vaxxed." That's funny. They're just going around in a circle forever. This last meme is a play on the theme of Back to the Future. It looks like the movie marquee. A Taliban man is looking at his watch. Near him is a Taliban woman wearing a burqa. She too is looking at her watch. And the caption reads, "The Taliban presents Back to 2001. What a sad but accurate portrayal of Afghanistan today." In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. The UN's International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, has announced that Iran is producing uranium that can be used to build a nuclear bomb. Surprised? No? This discovery by the IAEA is a major obstacle to renewing talks between the P5+1 and Iran. The IAEA Director General, Rafael Mariano Grossi, said that his inspectors now found that Iran had produced 200 grams at 20% enrichment. Just a few months ago, Iran only had 3.6 grams at 20% enrichment. U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price said the move by Iran was unconstructive and inconsistent with a return to mutual compliance. He said, "Iran has no credible need to produce uranium metal, which has direct relevance to nuclear weapons development. Such escalations would not provide Iran negotiating leverage in any renewed talks on a mutual return to the JCPOA compliance and will only lead to Iran's further isolation." He further said that Iran's nuclear advances have a bearing on our view of returning to the JCPOA and suggested that the United States was slowly running out of patience. Price said, "We are not imposing a deadline for negotiations, but this window will not remain open indefinitely." Almost every high school student in Israel travels to Poland during their tenure in high school. And now Poland is rethinking that practice. Poland is rethinking permitting Israeli youth trips to enter their country. Polish Deputy Minister Paweł Jablonski said that Poland was re-examining educational trips by Israeli youth because, he asserts, the trips teach hatred of Poland. This re-examination of a long-held tradition comes in the context of a huge diplomatic feud between Israel and Poland over the passing of a Holocaust restitution law. According to the Polish foreign minister, quote, "Educational trips from Israel to Poland do not take place in proper manner and are conducted in a way that hatred of Poland sometimes seeps into the minds of young people. We will examine the issue in depth because it is clear that the way these tours take place is not the right way." That's a quote. He then accused Israel of fostering, quote, "anti-Polonism," unquote, which is a prejudice against Poles as an ethnic group and the state of Poland and its culture. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett called the signing of the property restitution law a shameful decision and disgraceful contempt for the memory of the Holocaust. He said that Poland has chosen to continue harming those who have lost everything. An appellate court in Poland rejected a lower court's decision forcing two Holocaust scholars to apologize for defaming the uncle of a Polish woman who, they said, collaborated with the Nazis. The case against these two Holocaust scholars has been closely watched around the world. It is expected to serve as a precedent for research into highly sensitive areas of Polish behavior toward Jews during World War II and the Holocaust. Poland is governed by a nationalist conservative party and has sought to promote remembrance of Polish heroism and suffering during the wartime German occupation of the country. The party also believes that discussions of Polish wrongdoing distort the historical picture and are unfair to Poles. In explaining its decision, the Appellate Court of Warsaw argued that it did not believe that it's responsibility of the courts to judge scholarly research. The ruling was welcomed by the two researchers, who declared it a great victory in the Facebook post of their own. They wrote, "We greet the verdict with great joy and satisfaction, all the more that this decision has a direct impact on all Polish scholars and especially on historians of the Holocaust. The ruling comes half a year after the lower court ordered the two researchers to apologize to a woman who claimed that her deceased uncle had been defamed in the historical work that they edited and partially wrote. The work was called, by the way, Night Without End, The Fate of Jews in Selected Counties of Occupied Poland. The lawyers for the niece, who's 81 years old, argued that her uncle was a Polish hero who had saved Jews, and that the scholars had harmed her good name and that of her family by suggesting her uncle was also involved in killing Jews. Poland was occupied by the Nazis during World War II, and its Jewish population was subjected to mass murder and slave labor. During more than the 5 years of occupation, there were both Poles who had helped the Germans, that is, they collaborated with the Germans, and took part in that murder process, and there were Poles who risked their lives to save Jews. They were on both sides. The vast majority of them, by the way, simply did nothing. They were bystanders. They watched. Palestinian police in the West Bank, under the direction of the Palestinian Authority, clamped down on protests recently. And they're continuing to clamp down on protests, freedom of speech, in other words, and freedom to assemble in order to protest. Palestinian police arrested 24 people protesting the death of a prominent political activist while in the custody of the Palestinian security forces. The demonstrators had planned to call for an accountability in the death of Nizar Banat, an outspoken critic of the Palestinian Authority who died while in custody on June 24th, shortly after his arrest. Instead, police prevented the protest and arrested 24 activists. The PA spokesman, Louay Arzigat, issued a statement that demonstrators had not received a permit and refused to sign the conditions of the gathering. The statement did not elaborate further. Banat's family has said that he was beaten and that he was taken out of his home, and that they have accused the Palestinian Authority of trying to cover up his death. The Palestinian officials have said that the matter is under investigation. Of course, we don't know anything about that investigation. The protesting group's major complaint, aside from regular human rights abuses in the PA, is that the PA was elected for 4 years back in 2005, and that same government is still in control today in 2021. Abbas has faced mounting pressure for calling off parliamentary elections whenever it appears that his Fatah party would suffer a crushing defeat at the hands of their rival, the Hamas militant group. Al-Haq, a Palestinian human rights organization, condemned the security forces for blocking this demonstration and making the arrest. It accused the government of attacking the rights and freedoms guaranteed by law and called for the immediate release of those who were arrested. Superfoods are considered to be extremely nutritious and helpful. They are in big demand in the marketplace today. Avocado is a superfood. Israel grows many avocados and wants to grow even more to take advantage of a growing market. And so, Israel's largest grower and exporter of avocado, Mahadran, announced that for the first time it will be growing avocados in Morocco as it attempts to meet the constantly rising demand for superfood. Following the signing of the Abraham Accords in 2020, during which Morocco was the last of 4 Muslim-majority countries and Arab countries to join, there has been a gradual deepening of ties in the relationship between the Jewish state and North African kingdom. Mahadran is also looking to expand the production in Africa and Latin America in a bid to produce the fruit year-round and also to lower costs. Mahadran CEO Shaul Shelach told the news site The Algeminer, planting avocados in Morocco is part of a larger plan to be able to supply European customers more easily than from Israel in terms of geography and in terms of more competitive prices. Shelach added, by the way, that demand for avocados is currently outstripping supply, which he assesses will be a thing of the past when the superfood is grown more widely in both hemispheres of the globe. The current Israeli growing season extends only from October to March or April. Shelach hopes to start planting avocados as soon as he gets the land from the Moroccan government. Mahadran will have fruit on their trees within 3 years and full production within 5. The Israeli government approved COVID vaccines for everyone over 40. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has already received his 3rd dose. The coronavirus vaccine is enormously helpful in fighting against this Delta virus. Bennett urged everyone in his age group to get their booster shots. If you get vaccinated, we will be able to avoid a fourth lockdown, he said. The United States is now offering third doses of the vaccine to people who are in immunocompromised positions. The figures coming out of Israel for those over 60 who received a third dose several weeks ago indicate that very few people of that age have gotten very sick from COVID. Very few were hospitalized. It seems clear that the third dose boosts protection against the Delta variant. More and more younger and younger Israelis will be getting that booster vaccine. Ayelet Shaked co-leads the Yamina party with Israel's Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. Shaked said that she will bolt from the coalition and bring down the government if they even begin discussions about Palestinian statehood. Bennett is a rotating prime minister. He will leave the office after serving as prime minister for 2 years, and Yair Lapid will step in. It is no secret that Lapid is in favor of a two-state solution. It is assumed that there will be discussions of the subject during the first years of the government. While Bennett holds the position of the prime minister, that would probably be wise to eliminate that topic from any agenda item. The Arab party in the coalition is an integral part of the coalition itself. They have also threatened to bolt if Bennett responds to the increasing cross-border fire balloons, fire kites, and rockets coming from Gaza. Bennett is in a bind, another typical day as prime minister. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that there is a real quandary as to how the infinity symbol, that sideways 8, was created? We mentioned the symbol in one of our cartoons earlier. We really do not know how it was created. Clearly the symbol is the sideways 8, but that has nothing to do with it. 8 has nothing to do with infinity. Some thought that maybe it was the Roman symbol for 1,000, which is C going this way and C going this way, which is like that infinity sign. But that really doesn't make any sense either because 1,000 is nowhere close to infinity. We do know that in 1655, John Wallace used the symbol for the first time in a book which he wrote about math. The Jewish concept of infinity is extremely theological. It is deeply rooted in God. The Kabbalists use it all the time to explain the limitlessness of God. The term is Ein Sof, which means without end. In other words, truly limitless and certainly having to do with God. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.